When I walked into that courthouse in New Orleans, my son Marcus and his wife Celeste thought they had already won. They had tried to force me out of my own home, stolen my heirlooms, and even threatened to prove I was mentally unfit. But what they never expected was that I had discovered an old trunk in the attic filled with a fortune and secrets my late husband had hidden for me. That discovery turned me from a helpless old woman into someone with the power to shatter their plans and expose every lie. This family drama grew darker with betrayals, shocking courtroom revelations, and a twist that no one in the city saw coming. Do you want to know how I went from being thrown away to becoming the one who decided everyone's fate? Then stay tuned, because this story will keep you hooked until the very end. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. And now let's dive right into the story. When I walked into that courthouse in New Orleans, my son Marcus and his wife Celeste thought they had already won. They believed they had stripped me of everything that mattered, from my dignity to the home where I had lived for decades. But what they never imagined was that I had discovered a secret powerful enough to turn their betrayal into their downfall. That secret changed everything, but to understand how it all began, you need to know who I am, what I gave up, and how the people I loved most turned against me. My name is Helena, and I am 72 years old. I have lived almost my entire life in the same Victorian house on Esplanade Avenue, a tall, creaking beauty with stained glass windows that caught the sun in brilliant colors. Some people called it old-fashioned. To me, it was home. It was where I had raised my son Marcus, where I had played music with my late husband, and where every room carried the weight of memory. But before the betrayal that brought me into court, I lived quietly, almost invisibly, like so many elderly women do when the world stops looking in their direction. Each day began with the same ritual. I rose at 6, brewed chicory coffee in the dented pot I had owned for 30 years, and drank from the chipped porcelain cup my husband once bought me at a street market. After that, I would water the African violets lined up on my kitchen windowsill. They had been his favorites, and even though he was gone, keeping them alive felt like keeping a part of him with me. Life was predictable, modest, and small, but it was steady. I had no idea how fragile that steadiness was until Marcus and Celeste began their campaign to uproot it. Before their betrayal, I thought of myself first and foremost as a mother. For decades, I had sacrificed everything for Marcus. When my husband died in a scaffolding accident, Marcus was still in middle school. I worked wherever I could, sewing gowns for uptown ladies who looked down on me, scrubbing floors in jazz clubs that reeked of smoke, and spilled liquor, selling sweet pastries from a cart at the French market. I endured aching hands, sleepless nights, and the loneliness of never having time for friends or myself. All of it so Marcus could have a chance at a life better than mine. Marcus was bright, ambitious, and for a time tender-hearted. He used to sit beside me in the kitchen and say he would make me proud someday. And for many years I believed he would. But everything began to change when he met Celeste. She was sharp, ambitious, and stunning in a way that made people stop and stare. At first I welcomed her because that is what mothers do. But it did not take long for me to notice how her words cut like knives, and how Marcus began to echo her dismissive tone when he spoke to me. Still, I swallowed my pride. Every Sunday I cooked dinner for them at my house. I set the table with the good linens, polished the silver, and smiled through Celeste's cold remarks. I told myself it was only a phase, that once Marcus settled into marriage he would soften again. But weeks turned into months, and the distance between us grew until I felt like a stranger in my own family. It was not only emotional distance. They visited less often, and when they did, Celeste spent most of her time scrolling through her phone while Marcus sat quietly offering me only half-hearted conversation. The house, once filled with laughter, became heavy with silence. I convinced myself that at least they still came around sometimes, that I should be grateful for what I had. That illusion shattered the day they finally revealed their plan. The betrayal did not come suddenly. It unfolded in subtle ways, small cracks in the surface that widened until they became impossible to ignore. Marcus began to make little comments about the house being too much for me. Celeste began to send me glossy pamphlets for retirement communities, the kind with smiling, gray-haired couples playing cards on manicured lawns. Each time I protested, they brushed it off as concern. But their words carried a hidden edge. They did not ask me what I wanted. They told me what they had decided. Despite everything I tried to hold on to hope, I told myself Marcus would never truly abandon me. He was my son. I had raised him with love, sacrificed every piece of myself for his future. Surely he would remember that. But deep down, something cold began to grow in me, a suspicion that I was no longer a mother in his eyes. I was a burden, and burdens in his world were to be removed. Looking back, I realized the signs had been there for years. Celeste never called me unless she needed something. Marcus rarely visited without her. They showed no interest in the small joys that filled my days, no concern for the aching loneliness that sometimes kept me awake at night. And yet in my naivety I clung to the belief that family was stronger than ambition, that love outweighed greed. How wrong I was. The night that truth finally sank in was one I will never forget. I had spent hours preparing gumbo, the dish Marcus loved most when he was a boy. I laid out the embroidered tablecloth I had stitched when he was in high school, the one with patterns of magnolia blossoms and vines. I even bought fresh flowers from the market to make the table bright. When they arrived, Marcus barely looked at me. Celeste walked through the house as if she already owned it. Then as we sat down, Marcus cleared his throat and said words that pierced me deeper than any knife. "Mom, we have found a better place for you," he told me. "A retirement home with everything you need. This house is too much for you. And Celeste and I, well, we could use more space." At first I thought I had misheard. The room spun. I looked from my son to the woman beside him, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding. But their eyes were cold, their decision final. In that moment, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of love I had poured into Marcus came crashing back at me like a cruel joke. My son was not trying to care for me. He was trying to erase me, I pleaded. I reminded him of the memories in the walls of the childhood laughter that once filled the rooms. He did not waver. Celeste smirked as if she had won some long game. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the air stolen from my lungs. My house, my sanctuary, my life was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do, or so I believed. That night I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the photographs that lined the wall. Marcus as a child on his first day of school, his graduation day, the smile he once reserved only for me. I asked myself how love could twist into such cruelty, how the boy I had raised could now see me as an obstacle. Tears fell silently, and for the first time in my life I wondered if perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. But as the night deepened, something inside me stirred. It was not rage, not yet. It was something quieter but stronger, a refusal to vanish, a stubborn ember of dignity that no betrayal could extinguish. I promised myself that if they wanted to take everything from me, they would not do it without a fight. What I did not know then was that fate had already set the stage for the next act. My husband, gone for so many years, had left me something I never expected, something hidden waiting in silence until I needed it most. And soon that discovery would change not only my life but the lives of Marcus and Celeste forever. The morning after Marcus and Celeste told me I had to leave my home, the air in the house felt heavy, almost suffocating. I wandered from room to room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the walls that still carried my husband's scent of wood, varnish, and tobacco. This house was not only brick and timber, it was my life woven into every corner. Yet my son and his wife looked at it only as property, something to be taken, stripped, and sold. At first I convinced myself it had only been talk. Maybe Marcus had spoken rashly. Maybe Celeste had pushed him into it. Surely they would reconsider. Surely a son could not be so cold. But any hope I carried crumbled a few days later when the first stranger arrived at my door. It was a man in a gray suit carrying a clipboard and tape measure. Without introduction, he walked through my house as if he owned it. He measured walls, knocked on beams, scribbled notes about repairs. "The pipes are outdated," he said bluntly. "The kitchen is small and the tiles are from another era. You would need major renovations to make this marketable." Marketable. He spoke of my home as if it were nothing more than a carcass to be stripped and sold. I stood silently, hands trembling, as Celeste trailed behind him, nodding in approval. She glanced at the old quilts I had stitched decades earlier and whispered, "All of this will have to go." My chest tightened, but I said nothing. By the time Marcus arrived later that evening, the appraiser was gone, and Celeste was flipping through brochures of retirement communities with bright painted pictures. "Look at this one, Helena," she said in that artificial sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "It has gardens and a lovely dining hall. They even organize bingo nights." "I do not need bingo nights," I replied. My voice was quiet but sharp. "I have lived in this house for more than 50 years without your help. I know every creak of the floorboards, every crack in the plaster. I know which window rattles when the wind blows from the river. This is my home." Celeste's smile thinned. Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, you are being unreasonable. You cannot maintain this place anymore. It is too big for you." I looked at him, searching for the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the young man who used to hug me for no reason. But his eyes were distant, his face hard. "I am not leaving," I said. That night I lay awake, heart pounding. I felt like a trespasser in my own home. My husband's armchair, once a place of comfort, now seemed like a witness to betrayal. For the first time I understood that Marcus and Celeste were not simply suggesting, they were planning, and I was the obstacle in their way. The following week confirmed it. Celeste returned with more brochures, and this time with a lawyer. They sat at my dining room table, spreading out documents as if preparing for war. "Mrs. Helena," the lawyer said formally, "we have prepared the transfer documents for the property. All we need is your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You mean sell?" "No," Marcus interrupted, quickly avoiding my eyes. "Celeste and I decided to keep the house. It makes more sense for the family." I froze. My chest felt hollow. So that was their plan. Not only to send me away, but to keep the house for themselves. It was theft hidden beneath polite words and fake concern. "I will not sign," I said firmly. Marcus's face darkened. His voice, once gentle, carried a sharp edge. "Mom, you are not in a condition to make these decisions anymore. You are 72. You forget things. Last week you nearly left the stove on." "That is a lie," I snapped, fury rising in me. "Mom," he said with a sigh, "please do not make this harder. We are trying to protect you. If you refuse, we may have to pursue other legal options, mental incapacity, for example." The words hit me like a hammer. My son, my own flesh and blood, was threatening to declare me incompetent. My hands shook so badly that I clutched the edge of the table to steady myself. Celeste leaned forward, her tone sweet but poisonous. "This is for your own good, Helena. You will be safe, surrounded by people your own age. You will not be lonely. Safe, lonely." Their words masked greed with false care. I wanted to scream, to tear up the papers in front of them. Instead I whispered, "I need time." "1 week," Marcus said coldly. "Then we will do what we must." When they left, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat in the armchair and wept like I had not wept since my husband's funeral. Betrayal cut deeper than grief. Grief meant you had lost someone you loved. Betrayal meant the person you loved had chosen to hurt you. The days that followed were unbearable. Celeste began packing boxes without asking me. She tossed my embroidered linens into piles like rags, wrapped my china with careless hands, and stuffed photographs into cartons without looking at the faces. She even opened my jewelry box, taking my wedding ring, the pearl earrings from my 20th anniversary, and the gold locket from my mother. "This will be safer in a bank vault," she said smoothly. "You would only lose it at the retirement home." "Those are mine," I cried, reaching for the box. "Mom, calm down," Marcus said, holding me back. "You are overreacting. This only shows you cannot handle things anymore." The humiliation burned. I, who had sacrificed everything for Marcus, now reduced to nothing but a problem to be solved. But the deepest wound came not from Celeste's sneers or Marcus's coldness. It came from the way he looked at me that day. Not as his mother, not even as a human being, but as an obstacle. By Friday, Celeste had arranged for movers. "The trucks will be here Monday," she said casually, as if she were discussing dinner plans. "You can take what is essential. The rest we will handle. Essential." As if a lifetime could be reduced to a few belongings in boxes. That evening I wandered through the rooms one last time. I touched the walls, traced the grooves of the banister, sat in each chair, opened each drawer. Every object carried memory. My husband's desk with its stack of old letters, the shelf where Marcus's childhood books still stood, the kitchen tiles my husband had laid with his own hands. In the desk drawer beneath old bills and faded receipts, I found a small locked folder. At first I thought it was just another relic of the past, but when I turned it over, I noticed my husband's initials engraved on the clasp. My heart skipped a beat. I searched for the key, rifling through drawers, books, and boxes, until I found it tucked inside a worn dictionary. My hands trembled as I slid it into the lock and opened the folder. Inside were documents I had never seen before. I did not understand all of them, but one thing was clear. My husband had left me something. Something important. Something Marcus and Celeste knew nothing about. I sat in the dim light of the study, the folder spread open before me, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. For weeks I had felt powerless, stripped of dignity, cornered by betrayal. But now, for the first time, I sensed a shift. Perhaps I was not as powerless as they believed. And as I read deeper into those papers, I realized that the cruel betrayal I had suffered might only be the beginning. I sat in the study with the folder open, and the lamp casting a small circle of light on the desk. Papers lay in neat stacks, held together by old clips. My husband's initials were pressed into the leather on the cover, and the faint smell of tobacco from years ago rose up like a memory. My hands shook as I lifted the first stack. I had expected faded bills or old letters. Instead, I saw a will dated only a few months before the day he fell from the scaffold. The words blurred for a moment as tears filled my eyes. I pressed my palms to the desk to steady myself and began again from the top. The will was simple yet iron-strong. It named me as the sole heir to everything he owned, not only what I knew about, but things he had never told me. My name appeared again and again in short, clear clauses. I leave to my wife Helena all of my property and assets. I leave to my wife Helena full authority to manage, sell, or keep as she sees fit. There was a separate section about our son. Marcus would receive a modest sum only upon my death, and only if he had cared for me with respect and kindness in my final years. The words struck me like a bell. My husband had seen through time. He had written a line into our future that now sounded an alarm. Behind the will lay a sheaf of deeds. The paper was heavy and smooth beneath my fingers. I read the addresses once, then again, mouth open in disbelief. 2 small storefronts on a quiet corner near the French market. A narrow building on a street where brass bands sometimes filled the night with music. Then another deed for a larger property, a brick building with wrought iron balconies. The description listed 8 apartments. The rental income was noted in modest figures beside each unit. I did the math twice. It was more than enough to live on with care, and that was from one building alone. I turned another page and my breath caught. The building where Marcus and Celeste lived was right there in black and white. The deed described its units and its service entrance, and even the tiny courtyard with a single cypress tree. The owner of record was my husband, and by the will now me. I laid that page down and covered it with my hand as if it might fly away. All this time, all these years, I had fretted over grocery bills and worried about the power going out during storms. Meanwhile, the rent from these places had been collecting somewhere I did not know to look. I felt a sudden stab of anger under the surprise. Why had he not told me? Then grief silenced the anger. I could almost hear his voice in that calm way he had. I wanted to give you peace, Helena. I wanted you to live without fear. There were more documents. Stock certificates that looked like old money in a black and white movie. A shipping company with a long history on the river, the kind of business that rises and falls with tides and trade. The number of shares was not breathtaking on its own, but the notes in the margins showed when he had bought them and for how much. He had chosen well, and he had held on. Another set of papers detailed a partnership stake in a small restaurant that had become a favorite for locals over the years, the place with a red door where the gumbo was always perfect. The signature line held his steady hand, and a secondary page listed the distributions paid out to partners each quarter. My husband, who had always looked like a simple man, with calloused hands and a quiet smile, had built a quiet fortress out of patience and faith. At the very bottom of the folder, I found a letter in a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in his careful script. I stared at it for a long time before I slid a fingernail under the flap. The paper made a soft tear that felt like a breath. I unfolded the letter and began to read. My dearest Helena, if you are reading this, it means I have left this world, and you have found what I kept for you. I am sorry for the secrecy. I wanted this to be a surprise for your later years. I wanted you to have more than enough. I wanted you to be free from worry. There was a pause in the script, as if he had lifted his pen to think. He went on. I must also tell you what weighs on my mind. I have never been sure about Celeste. I see an ambition in her that makes me uneasy, and I fear that our son, who is a good man at heart, may not be strong enough to resist the pull of a life that looks golden but is empty inside. I have arranged things so that you will have the power to protect yourself. Use it with wisdom. Do not act from anger if you can help it. Use it to teach if there is anything left to teach. He ended with a simple line. I love you beyond the reach of time. Your husband always. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. The kitchen clock in the next room ticked in steady beats. The house seemed to breathe with me. For a while I let the grief wash over me like warm rain. He had carried this burden alone to spare me, and I both loved and resented him for it. But when the tears dried, a different feeling rose. Not vengeance, not even triumph. It was a clean, bright sense of purpose, like the first clear day after a storm. I set the letter beside the will and took a careful breath. Then I began again, this time as a woman preparing to act. I made a list in a small spiral notebook from the junk drawer. I wrote down the addresses, the names of the companies, the account numbers where they were listed. There were bank statements tucked behind the deeds, showing deposits made by a management firm I had never heard of. The amounts were steady through months, and then years. It was all so careful, so deliberate. He had built this structure so that even in his absence it would stand. But structure alone would not be enough. Marcus and Celeste were not going to stop because I had papers. They would press forward with their plan, and if I moved too soon, they would find a way to twist it. I needed more than documents. I needed allies. And I needed to be sure that what I held was current and unquestionable. I reached for the telephone and paused. It was near midnight, and the city had gone quiet except for a distant siren that faded quickly into the night. I forced myself to wait until morning. I slept little. In the pale gray before dawn, I put on a pot of coffee and set the folder where I could see it. The morning light turned the stained glass in the front parlor to a soft wash of color. I felt my husband in every beam. At 9, I called the number printed on the letterhead of the law firm that had drafted the will. A receptionist answered, and I asked for the attorney listed on the final page. He had retired. The new partner would see me if I could come in. I told her I would be there by noon. I put the folder in a cloth bag and locked the door behind me. The street smelled of wet brick and jasmine. I walked slowly to the corner and caught a streetcar, the old kind that sang on the rails. At the firm, a young woman with sharp eyes and gentle manners led me into a conference room with a table that could seat a dozen people. She introduced herself as a partner and asked if I would like water. I told her coffee would be better, and she smiled with understanding. Then I laid the folder on the table and told her everything. She read in silence for a long time. When she looked up, there was respect in her eyes. She explained what I needed to know with clear, simple words. The will was valid. It had been filed properly after his death. The deeds were recorded, and the properties listed under my name now. The management company was reputable and had continued to deposit rents into an account that was in my name, though I had not known to check. She asked if I had access to that account. I shook my head. She assured me she could help me recover it and set up proper online access and oversight. I felt myself sit taller in the chair. I asked the question that had been burning since the night before. The building where my son lives. Do I have the right to make decisions about that property? Yes, she said. Within the law and with proper notice to tenants. She did not ask why I wanted to know. She did not judge. She took notes and promised to move quickly on the documents. Before I left, she placed a gentle hand on mine and said I was not alone in this. It was a small kindness that undid me for a moment, and I had to blink hard to clear my eyes. I stepped back into the bright noon and felt the city hum under my feet. For the first time in weeks, the fear in my chest eased. There was work to do. I stopped by the management company next. The office was on a quiet street with a brass plaque on the door. A middle-aged man with glasses met me in the lobby. He had run the properties for years and seemed relieved to finally meet me in person. He pulled up records on a screen and showed me the rent rolls, the maintenance logs, the inspection reports. It was all in order. He explained that automatic deposits had continued as instructed and that he had been sending paper statements to the address on file. I realized then what my husband had done. He had wanted to tell me in his own time and in his own way. The folder had waited. The life he planned for me had waited too. Back at home, I made a simple supper and ate at the kitchen table with the folder beside me like a companion. The house felt different now, larger somehow. Not because money changes wood and tile and light, but because knowledge changes how you inhabit a place. I moved through the rooms and felt not only memories but authority. This was my house. Mine to keep, mine to preserve, mine to defend. Late that evening, I sat with the letter again. Do not act from anger if you can help it. Use it to teach. I folded the page carefully and slipped it into the small pocket of my bag where I kept my keys. I thought about Marcus as a boy kneeling on a stool beside me, stirring a pot of gumbo with more enthusiasm than skill. He had loved me once. He had been gentle once. Somewhere along the way, he had mistaken success for goodness and ownership for love. If there was any hope left for his heart, it would not be opened by rage. The next morning, I took small steps that felt like large ones. I changed the locks on my house. I called the bank and began the long process of securing access to the account where the rents had been deposited. I walked through each room and made a simple inventory. It was not panic. It was preparation, and it steadied me. I called the law firm again and asked for a meeting to discuss my options should my son and his wife attempt to force my hand before we were ready. The partner assured me she would be ready with letters and filings if needed. All day the house was quiet except for the soft notes of wind through the pecan tree outside. Near dusk, a car door slammed in front and footsteps came up the porch steps. Marcus and Celeste had come without calling. I did not answer. I watched from the parlor as they peered through the beveled glass and then paced on the porch. Celeste raised her phone and began to record as if a performance might give her power. After a few minutes, they left in a flurry of irritation. I sat in the dim light and let my breath slow. I knew a storm was building. Monday was still coming with movers and boxes and a plan to erase me. But the shape of the storm had changed. I was no longer a woman standing alone in a doorway with nothing but the past to hold. The future sat in a folder on my desk and in a letter folded in my bag. I had ownership papers, financial records, and a lawyer who had looked me in the eye and called me by my full name with respect. I had a management company that would answer my calls. I had a will that did not waver and a husband who had believed in me enough to build a shelter I had not known existed. The night before the movers were due, I walked the house one more time. I touched the banister my husband had sanded smooth. I paused by the kitchen window where the violets opened their tiny purple faces to the light. I stood in the front hall where Marcus had once run in with muddy shoes and a school ribbon in his hand. I whispered a promise into the quiet. I will not let you take this from me. I will not let you turn this place into an empty shell. Then I set the alarm on the small clock beside my bed and slipped between the cool sheets. Sleep came slowly, but when it came, it was deep. I dreamed of the river wide and brown and steady under a bright Sunday. In the morning, I woke before the alarm dressed in a simple dark skirt and a clean white blouse and made coffee. I set out 3 cups, one for me, one for the memory of my husband, one for whoever would walk through my door to try and take what was not theirs. I placed the folder on the table and smoothed its cover with my palm. The papers within were not simply ink and legal terms. They were a map and a shield. They were history and future at once. They were the quiet legacy of a man who had loved me enough to prepare me for a battle I had not seen coming. Through the window, I saw the first truck turn onto the street. Its engine rumbled low like distant thunder. A second car pulled in behind it. Marcus. Then another. Celeste. I lifted my cup and took a slow sip. The coffee was strong and hot. My heart was steady. The doorknob rattled once, then again. I rose and walked toward the foyer with the letter in my bag and the deeds at my back. What happened next would not be a scene of begging or panic. It would be a reckoning. The bell rang and I reached for the latch, knowing that the moment I opened that door, the hidden legacy would no longer be hidden. It would speak for itself, and so would I. And whatever came after would belong to the next part of this story, when truths step out of the shadows and faces can no longer pretend to be kind. I took one more breath, and I opened the door. The door swung open, and morning light spilled across the foyer. Marcus stood tall on the porch, jaw tight, trying to mask his unease with a smile that never reached his eyes. Behind him, Celeste clutched a clipboard and gestured toward the moving truck idling at the curb. Two men in gray uniforms waited beside it, shifting from foot to foot, glancing at each other as though unsure what storm they were walking into. "Good morning, Mom," Marcus said, his voice clipped. He spoke as though we were polite strangers meeting by chance, not mother and son, standing on the threshold of betrayal. "The movers are here. We should get started." I stepped aside, slowly letting them enter. "Come in," I said. My tone was calm, almost cheerful, though my chest pounded like a drum. Celeste swept past me first, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She looked around the house, as though she were inspecting a prize she had already claimed. Marcus followed, nodding toward the movers. "Start with the living room," he ordered. The men hesitated until Celeste snapped her fingers. "Go on," she said. "Everything's ready to be boxed." I walked to the dining room where I had set 3 cups of coffee on the table. The folder rested beside mine, its edges aligned neatly with the lace runner. I sat in my chair, lifted the cup, and sipped slowly. "Mom, what are you doing?" Marcus asked, his impatience breaking through the thin mask of control. "I'm drinking my coffee," I replied, setting the cup down gently. "And waiting for what Celeste asked, narrowing her eyes. "For you to realize," I said, folding my hands on the table, "that none of your plans matter anymore." Marcus frowned, his voice rising. "Mom, we already talked about this. You don't have a choice. It's for your own good." I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "No, Marcus, it's for yours. And that's about to change." Before he could respond, I opened the folder and pulled out the first deed. I slid it across the table toward them. The paper glowed in the sunlight streaming through the window. "What is this?" Celeste asked, reaching for it. "Read it," I said. Her eyes darted over the words, her confident smirk faltering. Marcus leaned over her shoulder and his face drained of color. "This can't be real," he muttered. "It's as real as the floor beneath your feet," I said. "That is the deed to the building you've been living in for 3 years, the one you thought belonged to someone else. Every rent check you've paid has come to me. I own it." A silence fell so heavy that even the movers stopped shifting boxes. Celeste's hand trembled as she set the paper down. "No," she whispered. "It has to be a mistake." I reached calmly for another document. "Here is the management agreement, signed by the company that oversees the property. Every tenant's rent goes directly into an account under my name, including yours." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This is forgery. You've been tricked, Mom. Someone is lying to you." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "The only liars in this house are standing in front of me, and I will not be moved like a pawn on your board." Celeste's face twisted in panic. She clutched Marcus's arm. "Tell her she can't do this," she hissed. But Marcus only stared at the papers, his lips pressed tight. The certainty he had carried like armor cracked before my eyes. "You tried to steal my home," I continued, my voice sharper now, "but this house is the least valuable thing I own. You wanted to declare me incompetent. You wanted to erase me. But you never knew who you were dealing with." Celeste tried to recover her voice, syrupy sweet. "Helena, you're misunderstanding. We only wanted what's best for you. What's best for me?" I laughed bitterly. "Was it best when you stuffed my photographs into boxes like trash? When you took my mother's locket without asking? When you told strangers to measure my home as if I were already dead?" Her cheeks flushed crimson. I thought, "You didn't think I snapped. You schemed." Marcus finally spoke, his tone desperate. "Mom, please stop. You're letting this paperwork cloud your judgment. None of this changes the fact that you can't live alone anymore." I rose from my chair, the folder clutched firmly in my hand. "You will not decide what I can or cannot do. Not anymore. The movers shuffled awkwardly in the doorway. One cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are we still packing or not?" "No," I said firmly. "Nothing is leaving this house. You may go." The men exchanged glances, then hurried out grateful to escape. The truck engine roared to life, and within minutes it rolled down the street, leaving behind silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Celeste turned on Marcus. "You said this would be easy. You said she would sign. What are we supposed to do now?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "She's bluffing. She has to be. Am I?" I spread the remaining documents across the table. Bank statements, stock certificates, additional deeds. The paper filled every inch of the polished wood like a mosaic of undeniable truth. Celeste's knees buckled and she dropped into a chair. "My God," she whispered. Marcus stared at me with something between anger and fear. He had always believed he held power over me, that I was fragile, dependent, incapable. But now he saw me differently, and he hated it. "You can't do this," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I already have," I replied. Celeste began to cry, her tears messy and real this time. "Helena, please, we didn't mean. Don't waste your breath," I cut her off. "You treated me like I was nothing. Now you see I was everything you underestimated." Marcus slammed his fist on the table again. "This isn't over." "No," I said quietly. "It's only beginning." I gathered the papers, slowly stacking them with deliberate care. Each sheet was a weapon, but I did not need to shout or wave them like a sword. The truth itself was sharp enough. Marcus I said, meeting his eyes, "You will leave my house today, and you will take your wife with you. Tomorrow you will receive formal notice to vacate the apartment building. I am giving you 30 days, not one more." His face twisted. "You would throw your own son out on the street. You stopped being my son the moment you tried to steal my life," I answered. For a long moment no one moved. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air. Celeste sobbed softly, hiding her face in her hands. Marcus's chest heaved as though he were swallowing down a scream. At last he grabbed Celeste's arm and yanked her to her feet. "We're leaving," he muttered. They stormed toward the door. Just before stepping outside, Marcus turned back, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, Mom? But you haven't. This isn't finished." I stood tall, the folder pressed against my heart. "It is for today," I said. The door slammed behind them with such force the windows rattled. The house fell into silence again. I sank into the chair, my body trembling with adrenaline, my breath ragged. I stared at the papers spread before me and realized what had just happened. I had faced my betrayers and stood unbroken. But even as relief washed through me, I knew Marcus's words were not empty. He was not the type to give up. He would come back, perhaps with lawyers, perhaps with lies even more poisonous than before. This was not the end of the battle. It was the opening strike. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in the quiet house, the clock ticking steadily above the mantel. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Strong, defiant, alive. Yet beneath the strength, a question whispered in the back of my mind. How far would Marcus go to get what he wanted? How much darker could his betrayal become? I folded the letter from my husband once more and tucked it safely into my bag. His words echoed in me. "Do not act from anger if you can help it. Use it to teach." I wanted to believe there was still something left to teach Marcus. But as the sunlight faded from the stained glass windows and shadows lengthened across the floor, I feared the truth. The cruel betrayal was only just beginning, and the storm ahead would test every ounce of power I had uncovered. The house was quiet again after Marcus and Celeste slammed the door behind them. The silence stretched through every room like a bomb, though my hands still trembled as I gathered the papers from the table. I had survived their assault. I had turned them back, but I knew that was not the end. Marcus's parting words echoed in my ears. This isn't finished. He meant it. My son was not going to surrender the life he believed was his by right, and so if he planned to fight, I would be ready. I stacked the folder neatly and placed it in the locked drawer of my husband's desk. For a long moment I sat in the armchair staring at the window where dust motes swirled in the fading light. I thought of the letter of my husband's handwriting urging me to use this power wisely, not for vengeance but to protect and to teach. My heart still ached at Marcus's betrayal, but there was no room left for self-pity. The time for weeping was over. The time for action had come. The next morning I called my lawyer. Her voice was brisk but warm. "Helena, I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you soon," she said. "Did they try to move you out already?" "They came with movers," I replied. "I sent them away. Now I need to make sure they cannot try again." She promised to draft a formal notice that would bar any transfer of property without my express consent. She also advised me to notify the police of potential harassment, just in case Marcus and Celeste attempted to force entry again. For the first time I heard in her tone not only professionalism but respect. She saw me not as a frail widow but as a woman standing her ground. That afternoon I walked down to the bank where my husband's accounts had been quietly waiting for me. The marble lobby gleamed under tall ceilings, and the air smelled faintly of polish and paper. When I handed the teller my identification and the documents from the folder, she raised her brows. "Of course, Mrs. Durant," she said, using my married name with a deference I had not heard in years. She disappeared into a side office and returned with a manager who shook my hand and ushered me into a private room. For an hour, he explained the accounts, the balances, the streams of deposits from rental properties and business shares. I signed papers that transferred access fully into my hands. When I finally left the bank, the weight in my chest had lightened. I was no longer a woman begging to keep what little she had. I was a landlady, an investor, the steward of a fortune, and the world would treat me accordingly. Still, I did not gloat. Power was a double-edged blade. I carried my husband's warning with me like a prayer. Do not act from anger. Use it to teach. The test came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my door just after dusk. When I opened it, Celeste stood alone on the porch, her face pale, her mascara smudged from tears. She held a small overnight bag and looked nothing like the triumphant woman who had once strutted through my parlor as if it were hers. "Helena," she said, her voice cracking, "please, I need to talk." I hesitated, suspicion tightening my chest. Yet there was something in her posture that was different. She was not standing tall. She was folding inward, almost collapsing. Against my better judgment, I opened the door and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table where so many battles had already been fought. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around a cup of tea I placed before her. For several minutes she said nothing, only stared into the steam. Finally she whispered, "Marcus is furious. He says you tricked him, that you forged those documents. He blames me for failing to convince you. He said," her voice faltered, "he said if I don't fix this, he'll leave me." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a long time I said nothing. I studied her face, the cracks in her confidence, the fear that shimmered in her eyes. She was no innocent victim. She had been complicit, cruel, greedy. Yet now, stripped of Marcus's protection, she looked fragile. "You came here for shelter," I said softly. She nodded. "Just for tonight. I don't know where else to go." I wanted to refuse her. I wanted to send her out into the dark the way she had tried to cast me out of my home. But the letter burned in my mind. Do not act from anger. Use it to teach. One night I said finally, "But you will earn every bit of forgiveness you ask for." Relief broke across her face and she whispered thank you over and over. She slept in the guest room that night, the same room where Marcus had once studied as a boy. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I had been wise or foolish to let her stay. The days that followed were strange. Celeste moved quietly through the house, helping with dishes, tidying rooms, even watering the violets on the windowsill. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice lacked its usual sharpness. One evening she confessed things that chilled me. How Marcus controlled every dollar she spent. How he had convinced her to quit her job, saying real wives devoted themselves to the home. How he had slowly isolated her from her friends until she had no one left but him. He told me, she whispered, that if I didn't convince you to move, he'd leave me for someone younger. He said you were losing your memory, that you were dangerous to yourself. I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him because it was easier than facing the truth about him. Her words struck me hard. For the first time I saw her not only as my betrayer but also as his prisoner. Marcus had twisted her the same way he had twisted me, using love as a chain. It did not excuse her cruelty, but it explained it. Even so, I kept my guard. Words were easy, change was hard. I watched her closely, weighing every gesture, every tone, and slowly, something inside me shifted. Perhaps she was capable of learning. Perhaps she could still be taught. But Marcus was another matter. His fury only grew. He began calling daily, leaving messages laced with threats. He said he would sue me for fraud, that he would prove I was unfit, that he would ruin me. I saved every word on tape. My lawyer advised me to hold them like arrows for when the time came to aim. Then came the night when Marcus returned in person. The doorbell rang past midnight, sharp and insistent. When I peered through the curtain, he stood on the porch, his face red, his body swaying with rage. Celeste shrank in the hallway, her hands pressed to her mouth. "Open this door, Mom," Marcus shouted. "You can't keep her from me. She's my wife." I opened the door just enough to speak. "Celeste is here by choice," I said. "You will not come inside. This is my house," he roared. "No, Marcus," I replied steadily. "It was never yours." His eyes burned. "You'll regret this," he spat. "I'll take everything from you. You'll see." I closed the door quietly, turned the lock, and leaned against the wood as his footsteps pounded down the porch. Celeste sobbed in the hallway. I guided her back to her room and told her firmly, "From this moment, you must decide who you are. You can live as his shadow, or you can learn to stand in your own light. But you cannot have both." The next morning, I wrote letters. One to the management company instructing them to prepare eviction papers for Marcus and Celeste's apartment. Another to my lawyer enclosing the recorded threats. Another to the judge's office requesting advice should Marcus attempt to press charges of incompetence against me. Each letter was deliberate, each signature bold. As I sealed the envelopes, I felt the shift. I was no longer merely defending myself. I was moving the pieces now. Marcus had underestimated me. Celeste had betrayed me. But the game was mine to command. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, I took out my husband's letter one more time. The paper was soft from handling the ink fading at the edges. I traced the words with my finger. "Do not act from anger. Use it to teach." I whispered aloud to the empty house, "I hear you, my love, and I will." But in the silence that followed, another voice rose inside me, sharper, darker. "How do you teach a man who refuses to learn? How do you protect yourself from a son who no longer sees you as human?" I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag. The answer would come soon. For the storm Marcus promised was gathering fast, and when it broke, I would need every ounce of strength and wisdom my husband had left me. 2 weeks after Marcus stormed off my porch, the letter arrived. It came in a thick white envelope stamped with the seal of the court. My lawyer's voice was grave when she called to confirm what I already suspected. Marcus had filed a lawsuit. He accused me of manipulating Celeste, of poisoning their marriage, and of interfering with his rights as a husband and soon-to-be father. Worse, he sought full custody of the unborn child. He wanted to erase me legally, as well as personally. The words on the page blurred as I read them. For a moment, fear wrapped itself around my chest like iron bands. He had escalated the war from whispers and threats to a battle in the open. Yet as the panic surged, something steadier rose to meet it. This was not the end. This was the moment my husband had foreseen. The letter he left me had prepared me for this very trial. I called my lawyer Victoria immediately. Her voice was calm but firm. "Helena, we knew he might take this path. Do not be afraid. You have the truth on your side, and I have the evidence to prove it." In the weeks leading up to the trial, Victoria gathered everything. She collected the voicemails Marcus had left me in drunken fury, threatening to ruin me. She subpoenaed text messages he had sent Celeste calling me senile and ordering her to pack my belongings without delay. She spoke to neighbors who had overheard his shouting late at night. Neighbors who remembered his cruel words when he thought no one else was listening. Piece by piece, she built a fortress of proof. Celeste, to my surprise, agreed to testify. She admitted to Victoria that Marcus had pressured her into every betrayal, that he had manipulated her fears and used her love as a weapon. When Victoria asked if she was ready to say those things under oath, Celeste hesitated, her hands trembling. Then she looked at me and whispered, "Yes, I owe her that much." The morning of the trial dawned heavy and gray, the sky thick with clouds that pressed low over the city. I dressed carefully in a black suit I had not worn in years. It fit more snugly than it once had, but I stood tall in it, fastening the pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary. Beside me, Celeste wore a simple navy dress that barely hid the swell of her pregnancy. She looked fragile but determined. When we arrived at the courthouse, Marcus was already there. He stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit whose polished shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Marcus's eyes locked on mine, burning with hatred. For the first time, though, I did not look away. I felt his fury crash against me like a wave against a stone wall. But I did not move. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense with expectation. The benches creaked as spectators shifted. The bailiff called for silence and the judge entered. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern gaze. His black robe swirled as he sat, and when he looked up, his eyes fell on me. He froze. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. The judge's eyes widened, then softened in recognition. He leaned forward, almost whispering to himself, "Helena Durant." The sound of my name on his lips made the years roll back. I studied his face, and beneath the lines of age I saw him, David Morales, the timid young intern I had once guided decades ago when I worked as a secretary in the family court. The boy who had doubted himself, whom I had encouraged, who had sat across from me with ink-stained fingers and fear in his eyes. "Yes, Your Honor," I said softly. "It has been a long time." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Marcus's lawyer shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of something he could not control. Marcus himself looked from me to the judge in disbelief. Judge Morales removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes as if to be sure he was not dreaming. Then he cleared his throat. "I remember you," he said aloud. "You were kind to me when others were not. You once told me I would be a good judge someday. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself." His voice carried through the silent courtroom like a bell. Marcus's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, with respect, this prior acquaintance presents a conflict of interest. We must request a reassignment of the case." The judge's gaze sharpened. "There is no conflict here," he declared. "There is only justice, and I will see it done." The trial began. Marcus's lawyer painted me as a manipulative mother, a bitter widow clinging to power she did not deserve. He spoke of emotional blackmail, of a toxic presence in my son's marriage, of an elderly woman who refused to step aside for the younger generation. He gestured toward Celeste, pregnant and pale, as evidence of the family I had supposedly tried to destroy. When it was Victoria's turn, she rose with quiet authority. She did not raise her voice. She did not waste words. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, each item sharp and undeniable. She read aloud Marcus's texts in which he threatened Celeste with abandonment if she failed to remove me from my home. She played recordings of his voice slurred with drink, calling me useless, promising to take everything from me. She introduced neighbors who testified about the shouting, about the threats, about the cruel laughter that often followed. Then came the moment I had not expected. Celeste took the stand. She sat trembling, hands folded over her stomach, her voice faint at first, but growing steadier with each word. She admitted everything, that she had packed my belongings against my will, that she had stolen my jewelry under Marcus's instruction, that she had called me incompetent because Marcus insisted it was the only way to secure my house. Tears ran down her face as she spoke, but she did not stop. "I betrayed her," she said, her voice breaking. "I treated her like trash, but it was because Marcus told me to. He said she was senile, that she was dangerous. I believed him. I thought if I didn't, he would leave me. I was wrong." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of her weeping. I sat frozen, torn between anger and pity. Marcus stared at her in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing without words. At last, Judge Morales leaned forward, his gaze hard as stone. "Mr. Durant," he said to Marcus, "you have been the only manipulator in this story. You tried to strip your mother of her home, her dignity, and her rights. You sought to weaponize the law against her, to erase her under the guise of care. This court will not allow it." His gavel struck like thunder. The petition for custody is denied. Mr. Durant is barred from contact with his wife and mother until further notice. Furthermore, he will pay all legal costs and restitution for emotional damages. The words rang through the courtroom, final and absolute. Marcus slumped in his chair, pale and shaking. Celeste sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking with relief and regret. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding not with fear but with the peace of vindication. When the session ended, Judge Morales lingered as the room emptied. He approached me quietly, his robe brushing the floor. "Helena," he said softly, "you once believed in me when I had nothing. Today I hope I returned that gift." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "You did more than that, David. You reminded me that kindness always comes back when it's needed most." Outside the courthouse, the air was fresh, the storm clouds breaking apart to reveal sunlight. Celeste clung to me, weeping apologies. I held her loosely, uncertain if forgiveness could come so quickly. But I knew one thing with certainty. Marcus's war against me had ended in this courtroom, but the scars he left would shape us for years to come. And as I stood on the courthouse steps, my husband's words echoed in my mind once again. "Do not act from anger. Use it to teach." I had won, yes. But what came after the redemption, the healing, the rebuilding, would be a trial of its own. The courthouse doors closed behind us with a heavy finality. Marcus had stormed away, spitting curses under his breath, his lawyer trailing after him like a shadow that had lost its master. The echo of the gavel still rang in my ears, a sound that had cut through years of humiliation like lightning through a storm. I had won, but the victory felt heavier than triumph. It was survival, justice, and grief all tangled together. Celeste walked beside me, clutching her belly, her tears still streaking her face. Outside on the wide stone steps, she sank down onto the railing, her body trembling. For the first time since I had met her, she looked less like the polished woman of ambition and more like a frightened girl who had lost everything she thought she knew. "Helena," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Not after what I did to you." Her words cracked like dry wood, fragile but raw. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman who had sneered at my quilts, who had stuffed my photographs into boxes as if they were trash. But all I saw was regret. "I don't know if forgiveness comes that easily," I said quietly. "But if you mean what you say, you will show me through your actions, not your words." She nodded, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. "Then I will spend the rest of my life proving it." In the months that followed, I saw her begin to keep that promise. She moved into the guest room not as a conqueror claiming space, but as someone who was grateful for shelter. She washed her own dishes, tidied her room, even helped me with the laundry without being asked. At first, I waited for the mask to slip, for the sharpness to return, but instead I saw something else emerge. A woman who had been stripped down to the bone by Marcus's control, slowly learning to build herself back up. The baby came on a stormy evening in late summer. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the panes, and in the dim light of the bedroom, Celeste clutched my hand as she brought new life into the world. When the infant's cry split the air, my heart swelled in a way I had not felt in years. The nurse laid the tiny bundle in Celeste's arms, and she looked at me with wide, wet eyes. "Her name is Amara," she whispered. I leaned close, pressing my lips to the baby's soft head. "Welcome, Amara," I murmured. "Welcome to a world that will be better than the one we knew." Holding that child, I felt my husband's presence again. It was as if he had known all along that this moment would come, that the wealth he had hidden was not only for me, but for the generations to follow. His letter had told me to use the power wisely, not for anger, but for teaching. And as I looked into Amara's tiny face, I knew the lesson had only begun. Life did not transform overnight. Healing never does. But little by little, our home began to shift from a battlefield to a sanctuary. Celeste learned to laugh again. Not the brittle laugh I remembered, but a sound warm and genuine. She began attending classes at the community college, determined to rebuild her skills and independence. She took jobs part-time, first clerical work, then accounting slowly, piecing together a career that was hers alone, not borrowed from Marcus's shadow. I watched her with cautious pride. She stumbled, she doubted, she wept, but she kept going. And in her persistence, I saw a glimmer of the woman she might become. As for me, I discovered that victory in court was not enough to quiet the ache of betrayal. There were nights I sat awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Marcus's words. "You'll regret this. I'll take everything from you." Those wounds lingered. Yet instead of letting them fester, I searched for a way to turn them outward, to give them meaning. The answer came one afternoon when I read a letter in the newspaper about an elderly woman swindled by her own grandchildren. She had been forced out of her home and left to survive in a shelter. Her story echoed mine, yet she had no folder of documents, no secret fortune, no letter of protection from a husband. She had only her pain. I clipped that article and placed it on my kitchen table. By the time the sun set, I had made my decision. I would use the wealth my husband had left me to build something greater than myself. Within months, I founded Sanctuary House, a refuge for older women betrayed or abandoned by their families. We rented an old mansion on the edge of the city, renovated it, and filled its rooms with beds, clean linens, and open arms. The first residents arrived carrying little more than a suitcase and broken hearts. Some had been discarded like burdens by children they had raised. Others had been manipulated out of their homes and savings. Each woman carried her own scars, but together we built a family out of the pieces. Celeste became one of the program's first volunteers. She counseled women trapped in controlling marriages, speaking from the raw truth of her own scars. The women listened because she did not preach, she confessed. And in confessing, she gave them courage. As Amara grew, her laughter filled the halls. She toddled between the women, bringing light to rooms that had been dark for years. They called her their house angel, the child, who reminded them that even after betrayal, love could return. For me, Sanctuary House became more than a project. It became redemption itself. Each woman who walked through its doors reminded me that my pain was not unique, that cruelty against the old was a quiet epidemic. But it also showed me that dignity could be rebuilt one act of kindness at a time. Years slipped by. The foundation grew. Donations poured in, and we opened 2 more houses across the city. Reporters came writing stories about the woman who had turned her family's betrayal into a mission of hope. They called me the Grand Matriarch of New Orleans, though I laughed at the title. I was no queen, no saint. I was simply a woman who refused to be erased. One evening, as Amara played in the garden with her dolls, Celeste joined me on the porch. She carried a stack of letters from residents who had found new life through the foundation. She read them aloud, tears filling her eyes. "Helena," she said, "you saved me when I did not deserve it, and now you've saved so many others. I hope someday I can do the same." I reached for her hand. "You already are, Celeste. Every time you tell your story, every time you stand up for someone else, you prove that you've changed." She squeezed my hand, her grip firm, her voice steady. "Marcus tried to break us both, but we're still standing, stronger than before." As twilight settled over the garden, I thought of my husband again. I imagined him watching from beyond, proud, not of the wealth he had left, but of what we had built with it. His letter had been more than instructions. It had been a prophecy, and we had fulfilled it. But even as I basked in that peace, I knew the story was not finished. Marcus had vanished after the trial, but men like him rarely disappear forever. Somewhere he was plotting, nursing his bitterness, waiting for a chance to return. And when that day came, I would be ready. 5 years passed more swiftly than I could have imagined. The seasons turned one after the other, and with each passing year I saw how far life had carried us from those dark days when I thought I would be cast out of my own home. The house on Esplanade Avenue still stood tall, its stained glass windows catching the morning sun, its rooms alive again with laughter and purpose. The woman who had once sat weeping in the kitchen, believing herself powerless, was gone. In her place lived someone stronger, someone who had learned that dignity was not given by others but claimed for oneself. On a spring afternoon, the garden bloomed with roses, magnolias, and the violet plants my husband had loved so dearly. I sat on the porch rocking gently as my granddaughter Amara chased butterflies through the grass. She was 4 now, quick and fearless, with her mother's dark eyes and a stubborn chin that reminded me of myself. She carried in her laughter the promise of a future brighter than any I had dared to dream. "Grandma, look what I found," she shouted, racing toward me with a yellow flower clutched in her small hand. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her into my lap. "Shall we put it in the vase with the others?" She nodded eagerly and I pressed a kiss to her forehead. In that moment, I felt the weight of all the battles I had fought melt away. The betrayals, the courtrooms, the nights of fear, they had all led here to this porch, to this child's smile. From the kitchen, Celeste called out, "Mom, the mail just came." She stepped onto the porch with an envelope in her hands, her hair tied back, her face glowing with the health of a woman who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. She handed me the letter, her eyes alight with curiosity. I opened it carefully and read aloud. It was an invitation from the foundation I had started, Sanctuary House. They were inaugurating their third home, one that would shelter 15 more women abandoned or abused in their old age. My heart swelled as I read. What had begun as a single refuge had grown into a network of hope. Over 50 women had already passed through our doors, each with her own story of survival, each carrying away not only a bed to sleep in, but the dignity that had been stripped from her. Celeste wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "They want you to speak at the opening, don't they?" "Yes," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. "They say they want me to tell my story to remind others that pain can be turned into purpose." As I sat with the letter in my lap, I thought of all the women who had written to me over the years. The 75-year-old who had found the courage to confront her abusive son. The 60-year-old who had reclaimed her home after her grandchildren tried to swindle her. Each letter was a testament that my suffering had not been wasted. Each story was proof that betrayal did not have to be the end of the road. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the doorbell rang. Celeste went to answer and returned with a smile of surprise. "Mom, you have visitors." On the porch stood retired Judge David Morales, the same man who had presided over Marcus's trial, now dressed in a simple suit. Beside him was an elegant woman with silver hair who introduced herself as his wife, Helena. "Mrs. Durant," David said warmly, taking my hands in his. "I wanted to thank you in person for what you've done since that day in court. Your foundation has inspired many of us." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You give me too much credit, David. I only did what I had to do." He shook his head. "You turned personal pain into justice for others. That is more than most ever attempt." He handed me another envelope. "The Retired Judges Association is presenting you with an award for your work. We wanted to invite you personally." I was humbled but also moved. I had not set out to win awards or recognition. I had set out simply to survive, to make sure that no other woman would feel as defenseless as I once had. Yet here stood proof that even small acts could ripple outward, changing not only lives but perspectives on justice itself. After they left, Celeste and I sat on the porch while Amara played with her dolls in the garden. The evening was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace I once thought I would never know again. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Celeste asked suddenly. "What is that?" I replied, rocking gently in my chair. "That after everything you went through, after what I put you through, you never let bitterness take root. You never let the darkness win." I thought about her words and answered honestly, "Of course I felt bitterness. There were nights when it ate at me like a flame, when I wanted nothing but revenge. But your father's letter reminded me of something more important. True power doesn't come from vengeance. It comes from transforming pain into something that helps others." Celeste nodded slowly. She had learned that lesson herself, volunteering at the foundation, sharing her story with younger women caught in toxic relationships. She had faced her shame, and in doing so, had begun to heal. "Do you ever wonder what became of Marcus?" she asked after a moment. I took a deep breath. "Victoria told me he left the city. I heard he remarried, but I don't know the details. And honestly, I don't care to. Some people come into your life only to teach you lessons. Once you've learned them, you can let them go." Celeste studied me, then smiled faintly. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Before I could respond, Amara came running up the steps, her cheeks flushed from play. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandma again?" It was her favorite tale, the child's version of my own life softened into a fable. In her version, the grandma discovered magical powers and used them to protect her home from a wicked dragon. The good judge helped her, and together they defeated the darkness. I laughed softly, pretending to protest. "Again, haven't you heard it enough?" "Never," she said, climbing into my lap. So I told it once more, my voice weaving the story into the warm night air. As I spoke, I realized how far we had come. I had lost so much, yet gained even more. I had been stripped of dignity only to reclaim it with greater strength. I had been betrayed only to build a legacy of justice that would outlive me. When I finished, Amara looked up with wide eyes, and they lived happily ever after. Yes, I said softly, brushing a curl from her forehead. The brave grandma found her happy ending. She giggled and nestled against me. You found your happy ending, Grandma. I looked around the blooming garden, the soft glow of the house, the daughter-in-law who had once betrayed me, now working beside me, the granddaughter whose laughter filled every corner with light. Yes, I thought, I had found it. That night, after Amara was tucked into bed, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea. Letters from women across the city lay stacked on the side table, each one a story of courage sparked by mine. I thought of my husband, of the secret he had kept, of the letter that had guided me through darkness. I imagined him smiling proud, not of the money he had left me, but of how I had used it. Celeste joined me, her own tea steaming in her hands. What are you thinking about, Mom? About your father, I said softly, and about how proud he would be of what we've built. She reached for my hand. He would be proud of you most of all. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels whole, not empty. Outside, the city hummed in the distance, but here in our home, peace reigned. I love you, Mom, Celeste whispered. And I love you too, I replied. Even in the darkest moments, I never stopped. And it was true. A mother's love, battered and scarred, though it maybe outlasts betrayal, disappointment, and pain. It is stronger than greed, stronger than anger, stronger than time itself. That night I slept soundly, without nightmares, without fear. I had found something more valuable than fortune or power. I had found the peace of knowing that I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, my story was not about the wealth my husband had hidden, or even the courtroom battle I had won. It was about transformation. It was about turning humiliation into strength, betrayal into legacy, and pain into wisdom. And most of all, it was about proving one truth I would carry with me always. It is never too late to stand up for yourself. It is never too late to change your story. 5 years had passed since the storm that nearly destroyed me. And yet, as I sat on the porch of my old house watching the sunset, I realized that time had carried me further than I ever thought possible. The woman who once trembled in fear as her son and daughter-in-law tried to erase her had become someone new, stronger, wiser, and free. My granddaughter Amara's laughter echoed from the garden, bright as birdsong. She ran barefoot through the grass, her curls bouncing as she held up a butterfly cup gently in her hands. "Grandma, look," she called. "It's so pretty." I smiled and opened my arms. She rushed to me, pressing the fragile creature close to my chest before letting it flutter back into the air. That small, fleeting moment held everything life renewed, innocence preserved, hope reborn. Celeste stepped out from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes followed Amara with a tenderness that would have seemed impossible years ago. She had changed slowly, painfully, but truly. The woman who once schemed with Marcus to take everything from me now stood beside me as a daughter, not by blood but by the choices she made each day. She had faced her shame, rebuilt her life, and found redemption. In those 5 years, our foundation sanctuary house had grown into something larger than I ever imagined. What began as one house had blossomed into a network of homes where elderly women abandoned, betrayed, or simply forgotten could come and find safety, dignity, and family again. Over 100 women had passed through our doors. Some arrived carrying little more than a plastic bag of belongings and the heavy weight of grief. Many left with renewed strength, their heads high, their dignity restored. Letters poured in every week from women across the city, each telling me how our story had inspired them to stand up for themselves. One 75-year-old woman wrote that she finally told her abusive son to leave her home. Another 60 years old shared how she reclaimed her savings after her relatives tried to deceive her. Every letter was a reminder that the pain I had endured was not wasted. It had become a torch for others to see their way through the darkness. On that porch, I often thought of my husband. I imagined him sitting in the rocker beside me, his rough hands folded, his eyes crinkling with pride. He had hidden a fortune, yes, but more than that, he had left me a path. He had trusted me to use what he gave me, not just to survive, but to teach, to heal, and to protect. His letter had been more than words. It was a lifeline. One evening, a familiar knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, there stood retired Judge David Morales with his wife Helena. His eyes still held that same warmth I remembered from the trial when he recognized me as the woman who once encouraged him when no one else believed in him. "Helena," he said, "the Retired Judges Association would like to honor you for your work with Sanctuary House." I felt humbled. I had never sought awards. I only wanted to ensure no woman felt the despair I had once felt. But his words reminded me of something important: kindness, no matter how small, circles back when you least expect it. I had once given him encouragement as a young man, and decades later he had stood in court to deliver me justice. Now together we worked to extend justice beyond law and into life itself. Later that night, as I sat with Celeste, she asked me a question that lingered long after. "Do you ever wonder what happened to Marcus?" I thought carefully before answering. "I heard he left the city, maybe started over somewhere else. But I don't wonder anymore. Some people come into your life only to teach you lessons. Once you've learned, you can let them go." Celeste nodded slowly. She no longer flinched at his name. She had freed herself just as I had. Amara climbed into my lap, then her big eyes shining. "Grandma, tell me the story of the brave grandma again," she said. It was her favorite bedtime story, the one where I softened the harsh truths into a fable. In her version, I was a grandmother who discovered hidden powers to protect her home from a dragon. The dragon roared, but the grandma stood firm, and with the help of a good judge, she triumphed. I pretended to sigh, but I began the story once more. Her head rested on my chest as my words wove through the night. And as I spoke, I realized the story was no longer just mine. It was hers, too. It was every woman's who had ever been told she was too old, too weak, too useless to matter. When I finished, Amara looked up and asked the question she always asked. "And they lived happily ever after?" "Yes," I said softly, kissing her forehead. "The brave grandma found her happy ending." She smiled with sleepy eyes. "You found your happy ending, Grandma." And in that moment, I knew she was right. My life was not perfect, but it was whole. I had lost much, but I had gained more. I had been betrayed, but I had built a legacy stronger than any betrayal. That night, after putting Amara to bed, I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea. Letters from the women of Sanctuary House lay stacked on the table beside me. I picked one at random and read a single line aloud. "Thank you for showing me that it is never too late to stand up for myself." I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the words settle over me like a blessing. Yes, that was the meaning of it all. Betrayal may break you, but it does not have to define you. Pain may crush you, but it can also shape you into something stronger. It is never too late to rise, to reclaim your dignity, to write the ending of your story with your own hands. As the house grew quiet, I thought of every woman who would hear my story, and I prayed they would see themselves in it. Because in the end, it was not just about me. It was about every mother, every grandmother, every woman who had ever been told she no longer mattered. So here is the truth, as plain and powerful as I can tell it. It is never too late to stand up for yourself. It is never too late to change your story. And if you found meaning in my story, if it reminded you of your own strength or touched your heart in some way, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And perhaps by sharing, you will help someone else find the courage to rise.